I'll also pitch this catalog that we have included in our report is an effort to address one of those barriers we found for collaboration through our discussions. So jumping a little bit ahead here, but that lack of knowledge on focus areas for different labs and the difficulty in finding contact information within them proved to be challenging for some industry members. So we're kind of hoping with that contact list and areas of interest that'll be publicly available, I want to say in the coming months. I don't think we have a firm deadline yet, but we're hoping that's a small stepping stone to connect people to potential partners. So then after we dove into the national labs, we wanted to dive more into the Critical Materials Institute, or CMI. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but those who don't know, CMI is a DOE Energy Innovation Hub at Ames National Laboratory that was established in 2013 and is comprised of various members from national labs, universities, businesses that seek innovation and CM research for the domestic supply chain security. So within our report, we have listed those who are members of CMI. We've also included awards to CMI through DOE, and that includes the Technology Commercialization Fund, Small Business Innovation Research Program, as well as a list of currently funded projects for the fiscal year FY20 under CMI. Again, these catalogs are there to assist with the who is doing what question, and that table on the bottom right is pulled from the report and just gives you an idea specifically to CMI what their areas of interest are, such as reuse and recycling and developing substitutes with which some people may not know that well outside. All right. Our next step in our approach was to understand government funding, because without understanding agencies' perspectives, funding levels, and motivations, it would be difficult for us to understand and for others to understand how priorities flow from government to labs to industry or academia. So I don't think I need to belabor this slide for you too much, since we've had a great overview this morning from FECM, as well as learning about some DLA efforts and modeling. But generally speaking, we found this to be a knowledge gap or barrier within the critical materials space. And that's because it touches so many different agencies in different ways. There are different legislative bills and executive orders, and it can be pretty difficult for people to keep up on what priorities are. So just some high-level finds here, and I won't go into too much detail, but securing the critical mineral and rare earth element supply chain, it's a bipartisan effort, and it has support across the congressional aisle, as well as across the White House administrations. Secondly, government agencies used to be a little bit more siloed in their approach. I would say in the last couple of years, they're taking on a little bit more of a holistic approach, investing in different feedstocks, technologies, and I would argue they're communicating a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't room for improvement on communication, but generally speaking, there are more working groups, and they tend to be more aware of what the other agency is doing, which I would say is a development of the last couple of years. Through our report, we kind of go down the list of, what is EPA's stake in the game, what is DOD's, DOE, but I think we had a good overview this morning. But just to reiterate, it is important, to understand each organization's perspective, and that way you can learn about how your organization might align and can help identify you on who to collaborate with. All right, then finally, we started to reach out to stakeholders. So we held some informal meetings where we encouraged folks to speak as candidly about working with the national labs and vice versa, how the national labs have felt working with industry. And then we also sent around a survey to gain perspectives on the collaborative environment and kind of what the status of it is at this current moment. And those survey questions included things like, what's your impression of collaboration? Have you collaborated before? before? Are you aware of funding mechanisms to help with this effort or that may inhibit that effort of collaboration? How can collaboration be improved, and important steps in commercialization of CM technologies? Now, this is probably what you're all most interested in, is what did people have to say? So from an industry perspective, we had a general sense that they had good relationships with the national labs, but to no surprise, the catalyst of this is, for one reason or another, it doesn't materialize into organized research projects. So some of these reasons are industry interests and national labs don't always align. For example, labs tend to be more focused on fundamental research rather than scaled production, which industry has been focused on. Secondly, industry feels that national labs should identify buyers and users of downstream technologies. This was also identified by the national labs as an issue. Kind of on the flip side, national labs would say industry doesn't want to share their tech challenges for competition reasons, and that kind of leaves the labs guessing as to what those technology issues might be. And I suppose sometimes they're guessing incorrectly. This problem can also lead to some more duplication of efforts, which we've been trying to minimize over the past couple of years. Another reason that they may not materialize into full-on research projects is that industry feels like national labs can be a little slow moving. So they're not set up to solve quick industry problems and for example, I mean, let's say you are working on an extraction process. It's difficult to work with the labs to solve a small portion of that. If you have an assembly line to siphon that out and give it to the national labs, industry feels like that's a pretty difficult thing to do. Another issue that came up on both sides, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, but was how to identify the right partners. It's hard to find the contacts and decide which lab might be the best fit for your industry R&D problem. So obviously we talked about cataloging efforts as an effort to help that, but on the flip side, it doesn't help the national labs understand what industry is working on. So that would still be a gap even with lists of what the national labs are doing. Industry also feels that current funding mechanisms are limiting, and we got into this kind of already in our breakout session, but small businesses may be more willing to participate in collaborative efforts since they can be a little bit more flexible than some larger companies, but they do feel limited to SBIR or STTR solicitations. And then, of course, cost share requirements. We've heard that quite a bit throughout this workshop series, and that was echoed as well in our report, along with a lack of knowledge of current funding opportunities. Finally, on this slide, industry feels like there is a gap between new technologies and commercialization. So the first part of the problem is that industry doesn't feel like new tech needs to be developed all the time. And then similarly, once new tech is developed, the national labs have very limited capacity to move that needle forward. So now you can kind of compare those results from the response from the national labs, which echoed some of the similar things. Kind of at a high level, the national labs aren't quite sure why critical materials research is more stifled than some other research areas. For example, there is collaboration in the battery field and pharmaceuticals, but the national labs are finding it is difficult to get industry to collaborate because of that fear of revealing trade secrets. However, they did mention some facilities at national labs that can do proprietary research that folks may not be leveraging as much as they would like them to see. And then they also feel that CMI might be underutilized as they're able to license IP from national labs and can develop statements of work for organizations to work with CMI. So those were kind of the high level points we got back. And I know I'm almost out of time, so I won't go too much into the recommendation section. It will be in our final report. But generally speaking, and these recommendations were pulled from both national labs, industry, and some others out there that that have provided input. And I'll highlight a couple here. Project managers, experience with commercialization should help manage the finances. A lot of folks are finding that scientists research are dedicating significant amount of their time to just the schedule and cost concerns, and they'd like to much rather be focusing on the actual research and development side of the house. Also a more targeted outreach program, with detailed information on projects, and researchers at national laboratories might be helpful. Some folks recommended a regular email or newsletter with projects that are seeking potential partners or area of expertise. And then I'll just highlight one more here, more open sharing of technology development through key performance indicators without revealing trade secrets. I know a lot of folks mentioned that, look, we don't know where our technology stands and how it compares to other technologies out there because everybody's keeping it so close to the vest. So having a little bit more awareness of how, whether it be academia or industry, how their technology stacks up. So with that, I know I'm over time, but I will try my best to answer any questions you have.
Hi, Jackie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Now I can. If I couldn't before, if there were.
So we were muted, so I'm going to repeat what I just said for everyone. Jackie, if you could just take a quick look at some of the questions in the chat. I'm going to answer the first one, which is it possible to sign up to be notified when the report is released? And those in the room have already heard this, but to sign up for our mailing list, please email my colleague Michelle Littlefield at mlittlefield@usea.org, as we will be publishing this or notifying our stakeholders once this report is completed and published, and we will most likely have a webinar presenting the results as well and going a little bit more in depth than this presentation. And then there's a comment that we don't necessarily need EPA to do research with DOE, but we must work with them to make sure the protocols, methods that are developed for mining, refining, manufacturing, and waste will not get stopped due to environmental regulations. Definitely better to ask permission rather than ask for forgiveness. Jackie, I don't know if you have any follow-up comments to that.
Nope, I don't disagree.
And then the next question: which national labs outside of CMI participated in this report?
It's a great question, and that is one I'm going to have to get back to you on, Allison. I do know we included information on labs outside of CMI, but I can't remember, or I wasn't a part of the team that did the outreach. So I'll get back with you and ask Morgan on who gave their input. But in terms of our catalog, it does list those outside of CMI.
Thank you, Jackie. And I'm taking a look here, and we have contacts listed from Ames, Argonne, Brookhaven, Idaho National Lab, Lawrence Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, NREL, Oak Ridge, PNNL, and Sandy. So if not every one of those labs responded, I believe they were all contacted in one way or another. Not seeing any more questions in the chat. Any others in the room? Not seeing any. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. If we could just get to.
No problem. Thanks all.
And with that, we're going to move into our next set of breakout sessions. So same process as before lunch. For those of you who are online, I'm going to reopen all of our breakout rooms. Some of them might be a little bit smaller than before due to people leaving after lunch. And so we may combine one or two, but for the moment we will open the rooms and have some more in-depth conversation. And for those of us in the room, we'll do the same thing, just kind of circle up and discuss that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Aubrey Cawley. I'm a geologist at Cal. Joy is going to be helping me with taking notes. And Bridget and Amber are also going to take notes, but I think for the next couple of sessions, they might also have some thoughts to contribute. So they're going to be joining this session, breakout number 2. Is going to be focused primarily on the topic of a critical minerals consortium and what you guys think would be an effective implementation strategy for a consortium of that type. I'll just remind you that although they are going to participate, I am not going to participate. I'm just asking questions. I can't answer any of your questions, so you'll want to direct those questions, have them after the session to me or to one of the DOE representatives. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. And this is going to be a very open-ended question. What consortium model would be most effective to integrate Rddca activities across a diverse membership?
Maybe I'll just remind folks, since it's been a little while, we had lunch. Grant gave a presentation, right? He included the fact that DOE was authorized to stand up a critical materials consortium. Pretty high level, right? It needs to include activities that span all the 5 pillars that Grant mentioned. So diversify supply, develop alternatives, looking at manufacturing, material efficient use, circular economy approaches, and enable activities, right? So pretty much everything we're doing already. So we're really looking for
Right, there is actually one more talk, if y'all want to stick around.
Thank you, Aubrey. And thank you all for participating in all three of these breakout sessions. I think our online group, we have one group that should be joining us in about 12 seconds. So I'm just going to hold off real quickly. All right, it looks like everyone's back from the breakout. And as Aubrey mentioned, we do have one more presentation. I was discussing at lunch. Think that and you're looking at the RFI, it can be pretty overwhelming. And then, you know, there's been other discussions that maybe some industry members aren't as familiar with responding to different funding opportunities. And so that lack of knowledge is kind of disincentivizes industry from, or potentially disincentivizes industry from applying for various funding opportunities. So to help answer some of these questions and teach you know how to respond, teach you how to respond to a RFI or a FOA. We have Anthony Zinn, who's a technical project coordinator in high performance materials at the National Energy Technology Laboratory. Anthony, we can see you. And so if you just want to go ahead and share your screen, and the floor will be yours.
All right, great. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay. And can you see my screen okay?
We can. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name's Anthony Zinn. I'm the team supervisor for the Mineral Sustainability team at NETL, which is in the Technology Development Center. So I've changed positions since the information that was just stated. But at any rate, what I'm going to be going over today is, as was stated, some of the directions and information in order to do business with the federal government. That's going to include applying and looking at some of the solicitations or requests for information, as well as if you're selected from one of those, what will entail from that. So, sorry, I gave this same presentation last week and went a bit over, so I'll try to stay on time since this is at the end of the day. So basically, to start with, if you want to do business with the federal government, more than likely, there's going to be one of two types of instruments that will be used to fund you. There's financial assistance and there's acquisition. So financial assistance, the instrument that funds activity is a funding opportunity announcement. And basically, those are covered generally under the Energy Policy Act of 2005 and do require cost share from the recipient, from the applicant or the recipient, in the form of about 20% for R&D projects and up to 50% if you're if this is a demonstration project. Now, what a cooperative agreement, these are issued as either cooperative agreements or grants, and what the difference is a cooperative agreement includes substantial involvement. And what that is basically a defined list of kind of roles and responsibilities by both the recipient of the funding and the government. So substantial involvement is in a cooperative agreement, whereas a grant does not have substantial involvement. There still is oversight in a grant. Also, one distinction between acquisition is there is no profit and fee allowable in financial assistance. So the final thing in the box there are the regulations that govern financial assistance awards are in 2 CFR 200. And again, the middle word is the difference, financial assistance regulations, as opposed to going over to the acquisition box. That's regulated under federal acquisition regulation based contracting. And the difference is awards that happen to come out from acquisition are contracts, not cooperative agreements or grants. Cost share is typically not required in acquisition or in contracts. You can have fixed price or cost reimbursement are the most common types of awards you will get. You are allowed to have profit and fee in a contract. And again, they're governed by the federal acquisition regulations, or the FAR. So I'm going to focus from this point forward mainly on financial assistance. Everything going forward is going to be talking about that. Most of this is still applicable to acquisition, but again, it's going to be focused on financial assistance. So some of the things that are put out that you may have seen and some of the differences between these, we have requests for information, or RFIs, we have notice of intents, NOIs, and then we have the actual funding opportunity announcements, which are FOAs. And the difference between all of these three things, we put out an RFI if we want to solicit some feedback or information from stakeholders of the public. Now that information may or may not go towards helping us inform or kind of define or shore up potential FOAs in the future. It could go towards that, or we may be looking at it for other reasons. A notice of intent, however, is a formal announcement to the public that when you see one of those, that we are intending to prepare an FOA. And again, an NOI is just for informational purposes to alert the public that we're doing that. We're not looking for, and we don't necessarily want responses to that. But our actual award instrument, or what we solicit applications from, is a funding opportunity announcement. And when one of those are released, that's actually includes the details that you need to submit an application to get federal funding. So there are 3 websites here, and so to see where you're going to find these RFIs, NOIs, or FOAs posted, it's going to be when you get this presentation, these are all hyperlinked. You'll be able to go to these. But the NETL business page, which is netl.doe.gov, there's a link on it that says business, and if you click on that in the top, the first one, the first drop down that comes up shows solicitations and funding opportunities. That will show all annual appropriation type funding or type applications that we're requesting, as well as BIL applications or assistance award FOAs that are out there. If you click on one of those on the NETL business page, that's going to take you to a FedConnect page, which is the actual place where you go to review these, and you can ask questions and see questions that have come in on them already. FedConnect is at fedconnect.net, and I'm going to go over a little more detail about how you work in FedConnect in just a moment. But grants.gov is the actual site where you would apply for one of these awards. So this slide is just a little bit, there's a lot of questions at times on pre-award costs. So basically, a pre-award cost is that the cost incurred by a recipient, and it's at risk until a selected award is negotiated and awarded. So if you are selected for an award from an application, basically you have 90 days from the selection statement up to the award date that you could potentially request pre-award costs. They're based on the date of selection statement, and they're in 2 CFR 200, section 458 is where it's defined. But the cost that you incur at this time has to be within scope, allowable, allocable, and reasonable. And it does have to be associated with the selected project scope. Generally, once you're selected, within those 90 days, the contracting officer does not typically have to approve this. But anything that you would spend that's outside of that 90-day period, you would have to have CO approval to get reimbursed. Again, though, this is all at risk. If something would happen and you would not be awarded during the negotiation, then there's no necessarily way to get reimbursed for that. So some of the roles and responsibilities, these are some of the people that you're going to interact with. Basically, this is a team that goes throughout the FOA process through the solicitation and the award. The three main people you interact with are the federal project manager, who's going to oversee the day-to-day technical aspects of the awards, and they're going to correspond with the technical point of contact, typically the principal investigator. Then you have a contract specialist or a grants management specialist they're going to oversee the business management and non-technical aspects of the award. The contracting officer is the only individual authorized to actually award or obligate federal funds. So the federal project manager and the contract specialist these three roles will be involved from the initial inception of the solicitation all the way up through the negotiation and award. It may be a different team based on workloads and so forth. So the federal project manager on the solicitation or funding opportunity may not be the federal project manager for the actual execution of the award, but these are the roles that you'll interact with throughout the process. It's very important that if you're going to do business with the government, for those of you that never have before, there are 4 actions that must be completed before you're able to submit an FOA application. So let me highlight it. This seems like an odd number, but this was developed on history and lessons learned, I suppose, but you need to allow at least 44 days to complete this process. So you have to register for SAM, which is the System for Award Management. You have to obtain a unique entity identifier number. This is new as of April 5th of this year. Used to be that you could use your company DUNS number as your identifier for an award. You no longer can do that. So those of you that do have or have had awards in the past, this might be a new requirement for you. Subawardees and subrecipients also have to have this UEI number, and they have to give it to the prime recipient before any subaward can be issued. And then the last 2 steps, you have to register with grants.gov and you have to register with FedConnect. And I won't go through these steps in here, you can read this later, but it's very important that these steps are completed before you can apply for an award. So I'm going to step briefly through what you need to do, in FedConnect to actually find an award and interact with it, so to speak. So you want to go to fedconnect.net. The link is in here once you're able to see the presentation and it's posted. And you want to go down where it's circled to the search public opportunities. Once here, if you're looking specifically for any TL actions, you want to click issuing office, as it says in number 1, type in any TL, and then click search. And when you do that, it's going to come up with a list of anything in this issuing office column here. It'll have any TL. So in this case, this is something from 2009. It's very old, but as an example, it's bench scale and slipstream development and testing. So if you click on that, it's going to bring you to a new page where you can see the body of the solicitation and the amendments, if any, and so forth. So if you click on the body of the, if you click on where it says body, that will ask you, a pop-up will come down and you can either open it or save it somewhere on your computer and open it later. But that will download the actual financial assistance funding opportunity announcement. So one other thing that I want to go back here to, I mentioned it will have amendments on here. You can look at an overview of each amendment that's there. So it's going to generally either have a track changes version of the document or some other high level summary that makes it very clear what has changed between what was initially released or issued and what the amendment changed. So in order to, if you click this register now button, once you're on this page, it's going to let you, that's how you're going to be able to submit questions to NETL or to whichever agency you're applying to, receive emails concerning updates and so forth. Up to this point, anybody can go and look at this in FedConnect without registering anywhere. It's here that you're basically registering now as saving information on this particular FOA of interest. And then once you have registered, you want to sign in. And once you sign in to this particular FOA on FedConnect, it's going to bring you to the next page. And this is where you're going to be able to join a response team. So if you're in a company that other people are looking at this or have asked questions, you're going to be able to see other questions that were asked. You'll also be able to see questions that were asked from the general public in this spot. So you can see that it looks kind of like an email inbox. And basically any question that's been asked by other vendors, and vendors in this instance just refers to anybody else that is interested and has submitted a question to this funding opportunity. But basically you can submit a question here by clicking new, or you can look at the other questions and responses that have come in. We ask that you be as specific as possible with your question, but general enough that you don't provide any sensitive material in there. Now you can see that it says public. Anything that we can put in a response to will be public. However, there are private responses that can be had depending on what the question is. But everything is sort of in this inbox that shows all of that. So I went through that very quick. That's sort of a step-by-step how you would apply and find all of these. I'll end this first part of my presentation by basically stating that, again, these are the 3 websites you would want to go to look for any kind of NETL announcement. The first one is NETL specific. NETL announcements are also on FedConnect and grants.gov, but in a broader sense, FedConnect and grants.gov have any government or federal funding opportunity from other agencies as well. Okay, so if there are questions on any of that, I'll answer them at the end, but I'm going to transition now to once you've looked at that process, perhaps you've applied to a funding opportunity announcement. I want to kind of walk you through the steps that you would interact with NETL and kind of leading to from negotiation of an award to the execution of the award. So the first thing I want to point out is you can see the Technology Development Center in this high-level org chart at NETL. This is where, for example, the mineral sustainability team that I supervise is located, as well as other teams. And so this is where the bulk of the extramural projects are managed at NETL. We regularly engage with our Research and Innovation Center, which is in our in-house NETL research, with the Science and Technology Strategic Plans and Programs. That's where the technology managers reside. The Finance and Acquisition Center, which is where the contract specialists and the contracting officers that I mentioned earlier are located, as well as a lot of communication with legal, with NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, our Communications and Public Affairs Office. So this is sort of right in the center because we interact with more or less all of the different areas at NETL. I want to briefly go over the experience of the federal project managers that you'll be potentially working with. And the reason this is important is because if I want it to be clear that if you are selected to negotiate an award, you are going to be working with very qualified and experienced managers that are there to help you and make it as easy as possible for you to get through the process and make these awards. So you can see that I think this number is 106 or around there, but you can see the years of experience of the project managers that we have here at the moment. There are 10, for example, project managers that have been here that have 31 to 35 years of service. We do have a lot of newer people as well, 33, but there's a pretty wide range of experience, and there's a lot of experience at NETL with project management. They're also very qualified from an educational perspective. So you can see the number of degrees earned. 18 of the managers have PhDs, 44 have master's degrees, 41 have bachelors, and the different kinds of disciplines that these fall in. So a lot of these, 74 are engineering degrees of different types. I'm a chemical engineer, for example, but many of the different types of engineering degrees. They're biology, chemistry, physics, all of the physical scientists, so to speak, kind of degrees. And not only are they educated, but the project managers do go through a lot of training in order to manage these awards. A technical project officer certification is required if you're going to manage a cooperative agreement or a grant. A contracting officer representative certification is required if you're going to manage contracts. So you can see we have a lot more technical project officer certifications, and I'll show you why that is in a moment. But even the level of these, it shows a large level of training. So level 1, I believe, is based on continuous learning points, which are somewhat based on hours, not completely, but level 1 is something like 8 to 10 hours. Level 2 is, I believe, 40 hours of of hours required in training. And this needs to be updated and refreshed every 2 years with an additional 40 hours. So the project managers are continually being trained and honing their skills. This 33, by the way, likely refers to this 33 that are just newer managers. Similarly, level 1 and level 2 CORs have the same type of requirements of training. All these project managers manage a diverse portfolio of projects that have come from many different funding mechanisms. So I already mentioned financial assistance are largely cooperative agreements, grants. NETL does manage SBIR projects from the Office of Science, which are grants. There's also fieldwork proposals, which are basically agreements with other national labs. They're interagency agreements, contracts, so different types of funding mechanisms. The reason that there were so many more technical project officer certifications is if you look at the number of the awards, This is as of March of this year, so it's a little bit dated. 746 of the awards were cooperative agreements, whereas 294 were these other things, which includes contracts, task orders, interagency agreements. This explains why there's a lot more of the certifications for technical project officer. Likewise, this is just a snapshot of the total funding that we manage here. So there's about 4.5 billion within cooperative agreements and another 407 million in these other categories. I want to point out, this is not federal funding. This includes cost share of the awards. So the federal funding would be less than this, but this is the total project value of the projects managed. Okay, so I spent a little time going over all of that just to, again, emphasize the highly qualified and experienced managers that you're going to be working with. And now I'm going to go over kind of where this all fits in and the steps of this whole process. So the FOA planning document is something that's developed, and obviously planning is in the name. So it's a document that includes the technology managers, the project managers, subject matter experts, input from NETL, both NETL and headquarters. And it's where the goals, objectives, and the scope of work that we're going to solicit or look for is determined. So a lot of the people that fall into those categories that I just went over are involved in this process. And once the FOA planning document is done, that is then created. From that, the FOA itself is created. And factoring into that is the evaluation and selection plan. And this is where it's determined where what the merit review criterion will be, how it's going to be evaluated, and basically everything in this process is planned out in how it's going to be carried out. So once those documents are merged, you have the FOA that's then released, and you have announcements for that. So once the FOA is out, it's generally out 45 days. Often it's longer than that, 60 days or more. Applications come into that. So when applications come back into NETL, then there's a merit review panel, and there are technical review teams that are put together, again, of these highly qualified project managers, subject matter experts, people from headquarters, potentially, people that review the applications. And once the technical teams review them, a merit review panel comes to a consensus on these technical reviews, and they actually point score them. So in all of this, we basically get a list of put forward and engage a selection official, which is the next step, with this list of rankings based on all the different reviews that went into it. And the selection official will ask clarification questions, may ask other questions, will come up to speed and be comfortable with everything and make their selections. And doing so, they will sign a selection statement. And then once a selection statement is signed, it follows that there are communication of those selections. So that can be tech lines that NETL puts out. There are also communication to Congress that's made in different things. So once selections are made and communicated, that begins the negotiation process with the now selected project. And this is probably the most important slide in this part of the presentation as to what kind of you're going to be expected to work with us for and get honed, for example. So the first document, and these aren't in necessarily a particular order, but they are somewhat. The SOPA, which is the Statement of Project Objectives, is the main document that everything in your award is going to be based on. It includes the objectives of the project, the tasks that you're going to carry out to complete those objectives. It includes the deliverables and includes the awards deliverables. So everything that you do below this is going to be tied back to that SOPO. So the awardee budget is generally requested in the application. And then so once the project is selected, each of the project managers that's assigned an award has to do a TEB, which is a technical evaluation of budget. And this isn't just a high level check. This is a very in-depth check that we do of the budget. So for example, we're going to look at, there's a tab on this sheet that has labor. So it's not just, it's going to have X number of total labor. We need to have each person, the estimated number of hours they're going to work, their estimated rate that they're going to charge, how many hours is going to be for each task in that SOPO. We're going to need detail for the equipment you're going to buy. For example, if you just say we want $20,000 of equipment, that's not going to necessarily work. We're going to need a breakout of what builds up to make that 20,000. Perhaps what's your justification or basis for these numbers. So you need to be prepared to give very detailed information on the budget so that we can do our due diligence and verify that the budget is reasonable to complete the SOPO. So that this budget and the TEB are generally one of the steps that take the longest in this negotiation process. Not always, but generally if something is taking a while, it's this step. I mentioned NEPA. Generally, you're going to be supplying an environmental questionnaire with your application. So that's going to be reviewed as part of, it's not point scored, but it's reviewed as part of the as part of your negotiation. And let me take a step back. We're past point scoring. If you're here, you've already been selected for an award, but the environmental questionnaire is reviewed here and determined if it's going to be a categorical exclusion or if a more arduous process of getting an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement is going to be necessary. And that's dependent on the size and the tasks being carried out in the project. But that has to be determined here. The project manager will do a risk profile, a high-level risk profile of the project on the financing and different aspects of the project. Also, intellectual property and the data management plan have to be finalized prior to award. For intellectual property, this includes categories such as restricted, limited, and unlimited data. Unlimited data, for example, is data that maybe somebody that was selected for award has that they paid for themselves prior to this, that NETL doesn't necessarily have rights to, but it might be necessary to help with the project. What this step does is to list those categories of IP so that it's clear what information and data NETL and the public as relative to the unlimited data are going to get from this. And the data management plan is the document that's going to classify or indicate how the data will be shared and managed by the project. Once all of this data is kind of completed, the project management plan and the technical maturation plan, the technology maturation plan, all of this kind of goes in there. The project management plan, for example, includes the risks of the project and mitigation strategies for it. It includes lines of communication if you have subawardees And if decisions have to be made, how that's going to be carried out. It includes the cost profile. It includes milestones that you expect to make and when they're going to be carried out to help advance the objectives. Technology maturation plan is pretty much what it sounds like. It needs to be completed to explain how the technology may, for example, advance from a TRL 3 to a TRL 4 or a TRL 6 to 7 or whatever it will be. And finally, once all of these are negotiated, and this may be over a several month period, the funding actions occur, which is where the award will actually be made. Once the award is made, so you now have an award, and this is sort of some of the steps that occur throughout the life of the project, regularly or some one-off things. There's generally a kickoff presentation that has to be done within 90 days of the award. It used to be an in-person meeting. It's more or less always virtual now, or it has been recently. But what that is a chance for the project or the PI to lay out what they're going to do, what their milestones are, how they're going to carry out the work, their objectives. And it's not just going to be to the project manager who they've probably been communicating with regularly. It's going to be potentially the technology manager for that technology area generally attends the kickoff meeting. You may have some of the higher managers at NETL attend that. You might have the headquarters program manager and headquarters staff attend that, other project managers. So it's a chance for you to kind of get your project and your technology in front of others and provide an update on how you're going to carry this work out. There's periodic reporting that's due. Some of this is based on the federal reporting checklist. A lot of this is included in the project management plan. For example, it's going to have your milestones, your schedules, any issues that you may have. And let me say that the reporting is at a minimum required to be quarterly, but oftentimes, especially for informal update calls, for example, monthly, especially as projects get larger, is more appropriate. But this information will be spelled out in your award. Invoice inspection. Some projects may be on drawdown, others may be on invoice, in which case you submit an invoice and then it's reviewed and you're reimbursed after review. If you happen to get put on invoice inspection or an invoice type reimbursement, please know, especially this is important for entities that maybe have not done business with the government before. We do review these in pretty good depth. So if you have an invoice for $1,000 as an example, and there's no detail into that as to what you're being reimbursed for that 1,000, it's likely going to be rejected. You will, there may not be issue, but if you've not done business, the very first invoice you submit may be a little bit of an iterative process until everybody's comfortable and kind of learns what's expected to be included in there. Technology transfer is one of the main things that we're doing. Financial assistance is for the public good. I don't think I mentioned that earlier on, whereas acquisition is for the need of the government. So since this is sort of focusing on financial assistance for the good of the public, as much news stories, manuscripts, publications, conference presentations, as much as we can get out there, we encourage and push for that for technology transfer reasons. And then finally, there could be project and periodic headquarter reviews. We have an annual review meeting that we ask all of our projects to come to. So this is just a snapshot of some of the things that go on during the execution of the project. So kind of in summation of all this, the Technology Development Center at NETL, they're going to deliver competent and comprehensive project management, which is going to help you, perhaps an award or a PI, ensure that our research, development, and deployment objectives are achieved. And just sort of to end this, on NETL's homepage, and tie this back to BIL for a minute. There's a link at the top of their main page that says BIL Hub right here. If you click on that, I briefly mentioned this earlier, but this will take you to all of the BIL solicitations and funding opportunities specific to NETL, which again, if you click on one of these, it's going to take you to Fed Connect. But there's a nice link right on the NETL webpage that will let you look at that and go there. And these last couple slides are just additional slides to show the different types of training and courses that the project managers take to keep relevant in their abilities and to help the recipients and the awardees navigate these awards in the easiest way possible. So having said that, that's the end of my presentation. And if there is time, I'd be happy to answer a few questions if there are any.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I do now.
Okay. My name is Lisa. I work at ExxonMobil. Should I expect that anything that has to do with critical minerals is going to come through NETL? Or are there other sorts of places I might need to look, or is there a different search term that I would use, like on grants.gov?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I can try to, I think the answer is no. I don't think any critical mineral funding will be solely from fossil energy. I'm not aware necessarily of other actions that could come forward, but I guess this presentation was obviously specific to fossil energy and carbon management, but there are perhaps other avenues or solicitations from other agencies or areas that could come in.
Are there any other questions in the room?
I guess you mentioned it, but this is Lisa again, but that negotiation process, we should expect for that to occur over a series of months.
That,
Practically speaking.
I'm sorry, I cut you off, but I didn't hear the very last thing you said.
Practically speaking.
Practically speaking, it's probably a 1 to 3 month. It depends on how good the documents are that come in the application if you're selected for an award. There are some people that regularly, there are some entities that have multiple awards that have been through the process that perhaps get negotiated quicker. Somebody that's not had an award with NETL in the past or any federal award, it may take a little bit longer into that 3 month range, just because it's expected there may be some iteration to get the right information back and forth in order to do some of those documents like the technical evaluation of budget, for example. So to answer your question, I would say anywhere from 1 to 3 months would be a normal time frame for that negotiation. It could last longer, it could be quicker even.
Thank you.
And not seeing any other questions in the room or in the chat. First, just want to say thank you, Anthony. If we could all give Anthony a round of applause. I think this is a really useful presentation and really appreciate you taking the time to give it. With that, we have come to the end of our program. I'd like to say thank you to all of our speakers, Thank you to our fantastic facilitators from Battelle, both online and in person. Really appreciate your time and efforts, and you guys have done a fantastic job keeping the conversations going. I think the conversations were really engaging. And I hope that you feel that they were useful for you. I believe they'll be very valuable for us and for DOE. Thank you to our hosts at Argonne. You guys have been fantastic to work with. Made this really seamless and really appreciate that. Grant, do you have a couple of words that you'd like to end with?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo your sentiments, Alex. Thanks to everyone who came. I really felt the discussions today were extremely helpful. Had a lot of thoughtful comments, got a lot of perspectives, and I know I got a lot out of what we discussed today. And of course, I'd like to thank Alex and USEA for organizing this meeting, moderators from
Great. Well, for those of you online, we are going to go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you for joining us and spending the day with us, and hope you have a good rest of your week.